Hey, how's it going, dudes? Okay, so this is episode 4 of Making My Roguelike. So today we're going to be starting our work on the very first level, and also we're going to do a little bit of talk about a problem I run across. So first thing I did is I just selected a tile map, and for me, tile maps, they're confusing at first, but once you get the hang of them, it's one of the easiest way to create levels just because, it's basically just doing pixel art, but less complicated. So first off, I just went in and I edited the template, made just a simple little, I guess, stone, like cracked stone looking, and I was a little skeptical at first, but it actually turned out pretty good. And it's just going to be a template for now. So here I am, just experimenting a little bit, seeing how it looked, and then I just created a simple little box. And the box, like, I messed up on it at first, but I think it actually turned out really good because the little like un uneven bits kind of helped it give it some texture. Then I create a new layer, and this layer is going to be perfectly for the map. It just helps me organize stuff, and if I'm working on one thing, I can just select that the layer it's on and have every other layer invisible. And also when I'm trying to edit levels, I can lock everything else and just have the map layer set up and all that. So the pathfinding worked. It also kept the player in bounds. So my next idea was to create little rooms because such a small map isn't really going to work the best for a roguelike, or it could in some ways, but also not really. So, and it's just going to save me more time just to have multiple rooms in one level. So I make a little doorway here, and I start on the next room. But after I finished making the next room, adding in enemies and that sort of thing, I ran across a problem. Whenever I started the game, the enemies would automatically go and pathfind to the player, which I don't really want happening because then the player will get bull rushed by all the enemies, and he'll either be obliterated at the start or kill off all the enemies, and there'll be no enemies left. So that's a problem that I don't want to happen. And my solution was to add a door. But um, the door also blocks the player, meaning that I'm going to have to figure out a way to allow the player to move through the door, which is going to be a challenge in its own right. And now we're going to go on to a little talk about doors and level progression, that sort of thing. Okay, so level progression is definitely a main point that everyone wants to think about when they're making their game. So for me, my level progression is going to be through doors. And these doors, there's multiple ways to do doors, you could say. So the first way is you could have a key that the player collects, which unlocks the door. You could have the door unlock after the player has killed enough enemies. You can have the door unlock after a certain amount of time. You can have the door just go away whenever the player touches it. You can have the door go away when the player shoots it or some other object hits it and that sort of thing. But there are some downsides to that all. So with having a key, it's very, like, I hate to say it, but it's a very generic kind of niche thing that you see a lot, and it's really just not the best because then the player has to find the key, which slows down the gameplay and that sort of thing, which is perfectly fine if you're doing like an RPG or a slow-paced game, but for me, I'm trying to make it a little bit more fast-paced. With the enemies, it's going to be tricky because it's going to be a roguelike and different amounts of enemies are going to be spawning in, different kinds of enemies are going to be spawning in, so having to calculate how many enemies need to be killed before the door unlocks, super complex. Having it time based, it slows down the player, which I don't want. Having the player just hit it makes it a little bit too easy, but having the player shoot it, I think is going to be fair, which means that doors can have more health or less health than other doors, and it will just lead to a more smooth gameplay, I believe. So I will be constructing the door and all that code in the next episode.